Hey there, friends. This is Daniel. I'm chatting with you here now from the balcony of my apartment, and I'm very excited to have you here for my very first review of a book. This is going to be a review on George R.R. Martin's A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Now, this book is a three-novella collection, a prelude to his Song of Ice and Fire series that is Game of Thrones, Clash of Kings, Storm of Swords, A Feast for Crows, Dance of Dragons. These are the 5 books of his that have been published. He also has 2 more that haven't been published yet. Now, the TV series made George R.R. Martin very famous. The season 1 came out in 2011, and Martin is now a household name in many countries that have shown the TV series. But these novellas take place about 100 years, 90 years before the events of Game of Thrones. And they were quite enjoyable. I mean, they were simple stories about Dunk, who is a large, tall knight, covering and riding throughout Westeros, which Westeros is, of course, the setting for the Game of Thrones world. And in his company is a small squire named Egg. Egg has a hidden identity, and if you read the stories, he has it under disguise, but he has a secret identity that we find out later in the story. Having read the Song of Fire and Ice by Martin, I enjoyed escaping to an earlier time and meeting these new characters. These novellas had enjoyable adventures of a new hero, and he's trying to carry out good deeds and prove himself in both matters of chivalry and honor. And he was a squire to a knight that died, and then he took his shield and decided to carry on the legacy of the Hedge Knight. So that's his character. I would give this book about 4 out of 5 stars. I liked it for the most part. There were a few things that I had some trouble with, but for the most part, quite an enjoyable adventure series of novellas. One thing I found frustrating was how Martin was quite repetitive with one specific line in the story. Dunk the lunk as thick as a castle wall. He says this maybe 30 times in the course of the 3 novellas, but quite frequently. The first few times it was fine. After that, it kind of got a little distracting. You were hearing it again and again, and you're like, okay, come on, Martin. So that line was used quite often, and that got a little old. You enjoyed it, but then, yeah, it kind of lost its interest. Also, these novellas, while they were enjoyable, the prelude stories tend to cater to fans of Ice and Fire. So if you've read the series, then, of course, the novellas will draw your interest. You want to know, okay, which character is it, or what? Where are we in the timeline? Because this is at the time of the Targaryen reign in Westeros. These are a line of kings and queens that were around before the series of Ice and Fire begins. And so we're in the midst of the reign of one of the rulers of that family at the time of this story. And while they're enjoyable, they tend to cater strongly to the fans. And attempting to keep all these minor characters straight is difficult. In both the series and in these novellas, Martin tends to put a lot of minor characters, and you can forget who is who. And it can get a little convoluted when you can get bogged down quite easily sometimes. Luckily, with this novella, it's a shorter story. We're focused most all the time on Dunk and Egg, and so we don't see a whole lot of different characters emerging, just quite a few to remember for each novella, but you're not overwhelmed as you may be in the dense tomes of the series books. So that's something that people can get hooked up, can bog down on, is just how many times you'll hear someone's name and who are they. I have to go back and I have to check how are they introduced, what is their house, what is their house history in the story. And yeah, so that got a little bit annoying. Finally, I found it disappointing that Martin tease the reader with how the narration of the books was presented. They were often vague in regards to setting. When one story was over, you jumped into a new story, but you didn't know where it was. You knew it was sometime after the novella, but you didn't know where and you didn't know when in Westeros. It took you a while to kind of clue into the region of the land where you were next. This happened in The Sworn Sword, which was the second novella. My personal favorite, but I got a little frustrated and trying to find the location and the time after the first story. And I'm one of those readers that really wants to know what time is it, where are they, and if it's kind of shrouded in mystery or if it's ambiguous, then I kind of get distracted because I want to know where are they and how much time has passed. Also, Martin kind of teases you with minor characters that you come to care about. There was one character that had to flee for her life, and in the first novella, I don't want to say anything else, but you don't find out about some characters, her especially, until much, much later. And it's kind of left, so you're guessing what's happening to them. Now this is of course the Game of Thrones universe, and so there's sexual content, there is violence, and there's a lot of suggestive language, offensive language, done in kind of a medieval fashion because this is set in that kind of time frame. So there is that to always look for. You found it in the series, and Martin doesn't shy away from it in the novellas, although there is less of it simply because the story is briefer, is a novella, it's shorter. You're not going to have as many pages to have this amount of violence or these words or suggestive language or sexual references. So they're there, but it's a much simpler story. Again, we're just focused on Dunk and on Egg for the most part. And we don't jump around to different characters as they do in the series. You're sometimes going hundreds of miles or even thousands of miles to different characters with each new chapter in the Song of Fire and Ice. Here with the novellas, you're just focused on Dunk and Egg, so there's only so much you can hear in one fixed space and time in the story. Things that I liked about the story. It was a really good story that drew me in because I know, of course, I've read the series, but even if you haven't read the series, the books can stand on their own, which is some wonderful appeal to them. If you've never read any of the Song of Fire and Ice, the Game of Thrones books, you can enjoy the novellas and just enjoy the story of these new characters without knowing about the world and discovering it, and so you have a fresh set of eyes that isn't biased from everything we've seen in the TV series and everything we've read in the books of the series itself. So you can enjoy just the story of it seems like an old medieval knight's tale in a whole new place. But for those that have read the series, you're in a new location, and this a new location, but it's also very similar. So it's a place you've been before, but it's slightly different. You're not always sure where you are, and that's part of the strength of Martin, is that he can send you somewhere, and you have these new characters you've never heard of in a setting that's somewhat familiar but also different. So that's great. I also really enjoyed and found it fascinating that we could connect with these similar characters, these characters in a similar landscape, although they are different. I also really enjoyed Martin's ability to make a shorter and simpler narrative with characters that I care deeply about, and there were a number of thrilling adventures which befell them in the space of 100 pages for each novella. So the book's about 350 pages long, the paperback edition, which I read, and each novella is about 110 to 115 pages. So in that amount of time, you read, you can really get a good grasp of a fun story with rising tension, a climax, and a resolution, all thrown in there. There is, of course, the hint of more adventures to come, but you kind of have a very enjoyable reading experience, and things tend to happen pretty rapidly, which I think was a challenge for Martin. I think he likes to build his stories over long, vast amounts of time and really, really take his time with developing the story. But here he makes a quick-paced story, and it's enjoyable. So that's very nice. All right, I would like to read you one quotation from the first novella, The Hedge Knight. And this will hopefully inspire you or interest you in the story in case you want to read it. Of course, the main character, the protagonist, is Dunk. He's the large, tall hedge knight. Dunk lurched to his feet and pulled Prince Aaron up after him. Fumbling at the lacings of his helm, he tore it off and flung it away. At once he was drowned in sights and sounds, grunts and curses, the shouts of the crowd, one stallion screaming while another raced riderless across the field. Everywhere steel rang on steel. Raymond and his cousin were slashing at each other in front of the viewing stand, both afoot. Their shields were splintered ruins, the green apple and the red both hacked to tinder. One of the King's Guard knights was carrying a wounded brother from the field. This is page 108 of The Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Okay, so I hope you enjoy this story. In conclusion, I enjoyed these novellas. They were fun. They were fairly quick-paced. I read the whole book within the span of about a week. And so you don't have to invest a whole lot of time, but you can still get a very good action-adventure for the investment of a little time into these novellas. So I'm hoping to see more of these books in the future. Martin kind of teases that there will be more, although we don't know yet. And we've been waiting quite some time for his next installment of the Ice and Fire series. But hopefully we won't be waiting long. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review, and thanks so much. Again, please like and subscribe. We have our good friends on Kindred Spirits that would love to have you view their channel and hear. And yes, it's wonderful to have you here. So thank you so much for joining my first review, and God bless. Take care. Bye-bye.